Good evening. I'm Lillian Cerise Williams, Director of Community Engagement and Associate Professor in the University at Buffalo's Department of Africana and American Studies. Welcome to the inaugural presentation of the Eyes on the Corridor, Town and Gown 2021 Spring Lecture Series featuring Buffalo author Gary Earl Ross. First, let me begin by acknowledging that we are located on the traditional homelands of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and more specifically, the territory of the Seneca Nations. Senecas and other Haudenosaunee people are the original stewards of this land and its abundant resources. Their nations have treaty relationships with the United States and Canada, as well as other tribal nations, and they have been our partners and collaborators over centuries. This series of 6 lectures represents a partnership between the University at Buffalo's Africana and American Studies Department and the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor Commission. It brings together scholars and activists and will highlight the community's illustrious history and culture. It's my pleasure now to introduce to you Dr. Robin Schulze, Dean of the University at Buffalo College of Arts and Sciences, who will bring you greetings. Robin.
Thank you so much, Lillian. And hi, everyone. I'm Robin Schulze. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and welcome to this wonderful collaboration between UB and the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor Commission. And welcome to this incredibly wonderful speaker series that honors the Michigan Street Corridor and the African American community. So I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Williams for her incredible work on this and many other important initiatives designed to bring the university and the community together and honor our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. The Michigan Street Corridor represents the oldest and the most vibrant African American community in the city, and it has, as Lillian just said, a really long and rich history. And the Eyes on the Corridor showcases all of the social, cultural, and economic vibrancy of our region. So UB is a public institution, and I take that mission very seriously. And now more than ever, we need to underscore the critical importance of civic engagement as a value and an educational value. We need to truly serve the public that supports us, and this lecture series raises awareness about the vital role of Buffalo's African American community and the role that the African American community has played in shaping the city and the nation. And it brings together academics and public scholars and concerned citizens and activists by design to make that legacy visible. And I'm so happy to be here and welcome you all, and I look forward to Gary's reading.
Thank you. Now, Terry Alfred, Executive Director of the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor, will bring greetings. Terry?
Thank you, Dr. Williams, and happy Black History Month, everyone, and welcome. As an advocate for the community, the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor Commission endeavors to integrate the African American cultural significance and impact on Buffalo's history through public engagement, community education that encourages and increases cultural appreciation, preservation, and of course, community development. The commission serves as the connector of the past, present, and the future for those historic neighborhoods within the corridor. Now, the corridor is a nationally and internationally recognized Buffalo neighborhood that serves as the focal point of residents and visitors' experiences for learning about Buffalo's rich African-American history through its vibrant neighborhoods, shops, restaurants, unique structures, historical markers, people, and institutions, as well as its significant impact on local, national, and international history. The corridor is a rich composition of locations across Buffalo, and it embodies themes of freedom, cultural expression, and self-determination, spanning time and transcending a single geography. The time period celebrated by the corridor includes the abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement, and several cultural and artistic Renaissance periods. So on behalf of the commission, I would like to thank the Department of Africana and American Studies at the University of Buffalo, for including our commission, our quarter as part of this great spring speaker series. I would especially like to thank Dr. Lillian Williams, who is also a member of our commission's board of directors and a chair of our history education committee, and applaud her Herculean efforts in the coordination of this great series. Now, I'm really looking forward to this series and hearing the speakers, beginning with our great speaker tonight, Gary Earl Ross. So again, thank you and welcome. And I look forward to seeing you all in the coming weeks, enjoying our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. The moderator for this evening's program is James Ponzo II, Clinical Assistant Professor and PhD candidate in the Department of Africana and American Studies, who will introduce Professor Emeritus Ross. Ponzo's research interests focus upon turn of the 20th century and contemporary African-American literature, critical race theory, and Black history, politics, and popular culture. His dissertation in progress is titled Bold Truths and Uncomfortable Insights, Rereading James Baldwin in an Age of Uncertainty. James is the perfect person to be moderating this session. So James Ponzo, please.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. That is the best introduction I've ever received from one of my mentors. So I just want to say thank you. I got kind of emotional for a second. So before I introduce Mr. Gary Earl Ross, I do want to talk briefly about the rich literary history of African Americans in Buffalo. This ranges from James Whitfield in the 19th century to the 20th century authors, and including filmmaker Ruben Santiago. And some of the themes that have been covered include abolition, freedom, and migration. And this evening's guest, Gary Earl Ross, is part of this rich tradition. Mr. Ross is an Edgar Award-winning playwright, novelist, public radio essayist, and popular culture scholar. He retired in 2013 from a language arts professorship at the University of Buffalo Educational Opportunity Center. Named Erie County's 2003 Artist of the Year, Ross has published more than 200 short stories, poems, essays, and scholarly papers. He has won numerous awards for writing and teaching, including a Lift Fellowship for his fiction, an ASI-DEC grant for his fiction, an Emanuel Freed Outstanding New Play Award, and a Mystery Writers of America Edgar Award for his courtroom thriller, Matter of Intent, an Emanuel Freed Outstanding New Play Award for his anti-war play, The Guns of Christmas, an Emanuel Freed Outstanding New Play Award for the Mark of Cain, an Excellence Award from United University Professions and State University of New York, and for his public radio essays, first place commentary awards from the New York Associated Press and the New York Broadcasters Association. In 2008, readers of the alternative news weekly Art Voice voted him the best writer in Buffalo. His books and stage plays include The Wheel of Desire and Other Intimate Hauntings, Shimmerville, Tales Macabre and Curious, The Children's Tale Dots, Sleepwalker, The Cabinet of Dr. Calgary, Matter of Intent, Picture Perfect, The Best Woman, Blackbird Rising, a novel of the American spirit, Murder Squared, The Scavenger's Daughter, Wordcraft, a concise handbook for the everyday writer, The Mark of Cain, The Trial of Trayvon Martin, Nickel City Blues, a Gideon Rimes mystery, Beneath the Ice and Other Stories, Nickel City Crossfire. The Scavenger's Daughter and Matter of Intent were both filmed by CITOC Productions of India under the title Scavenger's Daughter and State versus Malti Mahasky. In 2008, Ross edited Nickel City Nights, Erotic Writing in Western New York, and published a collection of prose and poetry through his website, The Writer's Den. In June 2009, Edgar Award-winning play Matter of Intent was a selection of the NAAA Festival in London, England. Also in 2009, he co-edited The Empty Chair, Love and Loss in the Wake of Flight 3407, which was published in 2010 on the first anniversary of the worst air disaster to occur in Western New York. Later, they edited a companion volume, The Still Empty Chair. Ross's most recent editing project was Queen City Flash fiction from Western New York. Ross is a member of the Dramatists Guild of America, Mystery Writers of America, International Thriller Writers, and the Just Buffalo Literary Center. He is a past president of the Mid-Atlantic Popular and American Culture Association, as well as past chair of its film and comics areas, and past editor of its almanac. Past playwright in residence at the prestigious Ujima Company and current associate artistic director at the Subversive Theater Collective. He was awarded the 2008 Constance Saltonstall Foundation Playwriting Grant. An avid reader, film buff, bicyclist, gamer, and occasional actor and director, Gary Earl Ross is the father of 5 adult children and lives here in Buffalo, New York. Without further ado, please welcome Gary Earl Ross.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. You dug up some stuff on me. That wasn't what I said, so that's good. I'm going to talk tonight about the presence or the need for African Americans to be part of the mystery field. That is, my mother loved mysteries and shared them with me. She passed books to me and I read them, and I grew up loving mysteries as well. And there aren't too many Black mystery writers. There are a handful, and they're Attica Locke, Walter Mosley. There are a few who are very prominent. There are a number of us who are lesser known, like Frankie Bailey, who's a colleague, a SUNY colleague, but she's at Albany. And the Black experience lends itself to that oeuvre of the outsider, because a detective, and I'm not speaking of police procedurals, which is a different genre of mystery. That's something like, say, the Law and Order series, where you're looking at how police do things. And that's something that I wouldn't write because I don't know it, and that's not where my artistic inclinations lie. The detective in American fiction and in American myth is a true outsider who doesn't fit in with a lot of people. And he's kind of a loner. He may have friends, he may have partners, lovers, parents, children, but he's still the one who's on the outside looking in. And he's usually a bit of a cynic, he or she, usually a bit of a cynic. And I can't think of any group in this country who has been marginalized or forced on the outside more than African Americans. There are a number who have been probably comparatively forced out. There are detective series which deal with Native Americans, with women, with Asians, with people with various levels of ability or disability. But in every case, in almost every case, the detective, particularly the private detective or the amateur detective, is somebody who's on the outside kind of looking in. And most of us who write feel like we're outsiders. We're on the outside looking in. I recently got a new publisher for my Nickel City series. My former publisher underwent some business changes, and they were overwhelmed by that. And my third book was on their desk for over a year. And I finally decided to sell it elsewhere. And SEG Publishing Company said they were very interested in the third book, but they wouldn't publish it unless they had rights to books 1 and 2. So I had to negotiate an exit from my earlier relationship with Black Opal Books so I could have all 3 books go to SEG. And they decided they were going to publish the first 2 books and before they published the third, and have a box set for Christmas. I can't complain about that. So coming out March 1st is a re-release, newly edited, slightly changed from its earlier publication of Nickel City Blues. And coming out April 1st is a significantly re-edited version of Nickel City Crossfire. And then on May 1st, we'll get Nickel City Storm Warning. And I'm in the middle of recording audiobooks to go along with these, which is why I have my fancy headset on. I've been working on the audiobook all day. And so I'm really pleased with that, but I would like to read a chapter from Nickel City Blues, and then I'll talk a bit about what it means to be the outsider. And I'm going to start with chapter 11 in Nickel City Blues, and I will tell you my detective. His name is Gideon Rimes. Like my son, David, he is an Iraq war vet. He did a couple tours in Iraq. My son did 3, and this guy did 2. And he was in the MPs and later went into CID, which is the Criminal Investigation Division of the Army. And he's retired from the Army. He did a full 20 years in the Army and retired, and then came home to Buffalo. And he lives in an apartment building that is owned by his godfather, a retired Buffalo State professor named Bobby Chance. And he gets caught up in various kinds of adventures. Things were kind of quiet for him. But in this book, the first book in the series, he gets hired to bodyguard a blues singer, a blues jazz singer who performs at the Anchor Bar on Friday nights, a young woman named Indigo Waters. Now, Indigo is being stalked by her ex-boyfriend, who is a police officer, who also is the bodyguard and driver for Buffalo's mayor, Ophelia Green. Yeah, when I talked to Byron Brown when the book was in progress, he said, "I don't get to be mayor." I said, "Nah, I'm going to make a woman the mayor." And he said, "I don't get to be governor." And I thought, you know what? Okay, I'm working on the book. I'll stick a reference to Governor Brown in there, and you can have that. But Ophelia Green's late husband served with Gideon Rimes in Iraq, and so they are friends. And this person who is her driver is stalking his ex-girlfriend in an election year, and that poses problems for her. He has a very public confrontation with the boyfriend at the Shadow Lounge on Hurdle. And it's now closed, but it was owned by one of my high school classmates. And I set a scene there, which she liked. Anyway, when the boyfriend turns up murdered, he's the first suspect. So police break into his apartment at 6 in the morning on a Sunday. They drag him down to police headquarters. They throw him into an interrogation room and chain him to a table, and he's still in his sleep shorts. So this is chapter 11. Chained to a table ring in a cold, windowless police interrogation room was hardly how I had envisioned spending my Sunday morning. The front and shoulder of my t-shirt were sticky with blood dripping from my head wound. Chalmers and Pinheiro let me sit for a long time without offering so much as a paper towel to staunch my bleeding. Maybe they hoped I would bleed out because of Kenny, or maybe they just wanted to scare me. Either way, I refused to give them the satisfaction. I avoided looking at the two-way mirror as I gazed about the pale green room. Despite bravado, street cred, and lawyers, most people who sat in the stationary stainless steel chair would scare easily, but most of them weren't combat veterans who had already exhausted a lifetime's allotment of fear and just didn't give a damn. Nor were they ex-cops who understood the nature of evidence and chains of custody. And to one extent or another, most would be scared because they were guilty. I was innocent. But since my alleged victim had been on the job, the path to exoneration could be rocky. Bleeding lessening, but head still throbbing, I leaned back and closed my eyes. Kenny had failed to show up at Indy's apartment. After nearly 2 hours seated in the same uncomfortable armchair in which I'd slept the night before, I gave up and went home to bed. It seemed likely then he had been arrested. So when I slipped between my sheets, expecting to resurface about noon, I thought I might be slipping back into my life. Now Kenny's death would delay that. For how long, I had no idea. How had he died? Because they'd bagged my gun, I first assumed he must have been shot with a 9mm. Terry Chalmers had gotten a good look at my carry permit Friday night at the Anchor Bar, and they would have run me through the system. They had made no effort to locate my gun safe, which held 2 other pistols, a SIG P228 from my CID days and a .357 Magnum. They must have liked my Glock for the killing. They would submit it for ballistics. Once they realized it wasn't the murder weapon and hadn't been fired since my trip to the range 2 weeks earlier, they would have to let me go. And they would be no closer to identifying Kenny's killer. I thought about that for a long moment. Who would want to kill Kenny and why? Before I could assemble a mental list of possibilities, the door squeaked open. I raised my eyelids just enough to see Chalmers and Poirot step inside, their body armor replaced by empty shoulder holsters. Chalmers wore a sky blue shirt tucked into black jeans and a loose burgundy tie. Poirot's shirt was yellow, his slacks and tie an identical shade of brown. He was bareheaded, his hair creased above the ears by his missing hat's sweatband. A toothpick in one corner of his mouth, he moved to my left as Chalmers positioned himself on my right. It was too early on a Sunday for a ballistics test to have been run. Damn, they were here to sweat me, a presumed cop killer. This might get ugly. For a moment, the only sound was the foot-long handcuff chain ratcheting through the table ring as I shifted and opened my eyes. "Hey, fellow, we disturb your beauty nap?" Poirot said. "Nice hair," I replied. Poirot smiled. "At least mine ain't got blood in it." He leaned in, exhaling coffee fumes into my face. "You know, when you try to catnap in custody, we kind of think you're guilty and saving your strength for what's ahead." I squinted at Chalmers. Does he begin all his interrogations with bits from the usual suspects? Then I shifted my attention back to Poirot. Ever stop to think my eyes might be closed because none of you geniuses thought to bring my glasses and I might have a hard time seeing things? Not entirely true, but they didn't need to know that. Or could be I just have a bad headache because some dipshit hit me. True enough. "An ex-cop who's a cop killer," Poirot said, lips pulling into a snarky grin. "Guess it's a toss-up what happens to you in the joint. A high five or a high hard one up the ass?" "Man, I can't sit still for that," I said. "Any pointers?" Did you a favor bringing your ass in, you son of a bitch." Poirot was close enough now that we were past coffee and into last night's dinner. "If we didn't, every cop in town would be looking for you. Some of them are off duty with throwdown pieces." Is that supposed to scare me? Chalmers had remained quiet, studying me. Now he moved behind me, easing Poirot away in a classic good cop, bad cop move. "Look," he said, "I know you know procedure, so I'm going to ask you some questions straight up. Answer straight up, get your side out there, and maybe we can get to the bottom of things real quick, okay?" Theoretically, I could shut this down by demanding a lawyer, but I wanted more information about the murder. Of course, also theoretically, I could be killed during a struggle on the stairs or while snatching an officer's weapon. Internal Affairs would happily clear the cop who took down the killer of a decorated officer. Or maybe they would wait until I was in a cell in the holding center. Then I could hang myself with my t-shirt and star in 2 or 3 days of Buffalo News articles about suicides and lockup, topped off by an indignant editorial decrying jail conditions. "Go ahead," I said. "We know about the fight at the Shadow Lounge last night." "Then you know Kenny assaulted 2 bouncers. I paused for a reaction that didn't come. They knew. "I hit him in the throat to make him stop." "Is that when you decided to meet him later?" Chalmers asked. "To settle things once and for all?" "You make it sound personal," I said. "I was bodyguarding a stalking victim and your boy was the stalker. There was nothing to settle, never was." I looked from Chalmers to Poirot, who had moved to my right, occupying the space once filled by Chalmers, circling to keep me off balance. "If you know about the fight, then you must know Judge McQueen witnessed him violating her protection order and called to have him arrested." I smiled at Chalmers. "You must be homicide. I guess you don't get to family court much, but I believe you met Judge McQueen." He bit his lip as if suppressing a smile. I had my first hint that he at least had doubts. "Where'd you go after leaving the Shadow?" "I took my client to a safe place where Kenny couldn't get to her." "A friend's place?" Poirot cut in. "A hotel? A shelter? Where?" "Confidential," I said. "You ain't a doctor or a lawyer," he said. "You got no privilege here." I said nothing. Obviously, they hadn't exercised due diligence, or they would have known Indy worked at Hope's Haven, a logical place for her to seek shelter. I wondered what was going on here. "Maybe your little girlfriend did, Kenny, and is using you to take the fall. Ever think of that? You wouldn't be the first poor dumb bastard to go to prison for pussy." I ignored Poirot's offer of an escape hatch, certain Oscar had kept Indy on lockdown. "Where did you go after you dropped your client off?" Chalmers asked. "Where did you find me?" "What time did you get there?" "I didn't pay attention to the clock. I was tired and went to bed." "Is there anybody who can verify that?" "No." "So you could have gone looking for Kenny before you went home." "Do you have a witness that says I did?" "We might." I studied Chalmers for a moment, wondering if someone had noticed my car outside Indy's apartment building, near a complex that likely housed several young singles who might have parties or one-night stands. There was no reason my escape should rouse more attention than any other vehicle parked on Linwood. If somebody had taken the trouble to note my plate number and phoned it in, something different was going on. Somebody was setting me up. Why else would the police come after me? They had to have gotten a lead from somewhere. The fight at the Shadow had not been enough to justify a pre-dawn raid. Maybe Rogalski, the district commander, had seen a lack of cooperation in my eyes when he hinted Indy shouldn't press charges. Maybe he had dimed me out when Kenny's body was found. You have my gun, I said finally. Why don't you drag your lab rats out of bed and test it? You'll see it's not the murder weapon. The two detectives exchanged a look. You're too smart to use your registered piece, Chalmers said. I'm also too smart to kill a cop and leave a trail of evidence to my front door as if I never worked a homicide before. But that didn't stop you from busting it in and dragging me down here almost naked. I think I'm insulted. I let out a breath and leaned forward. What made you think it was me? A 9mm shell casing or a call to your tip line? What did the caller say? A cop was shot dead and he saw somebody driving away in a car like mine? Neither one said anything. Driving away from where? Where was the body found anyway? I sat back. I think you two got sucker punched by bad intel, and you're starting to realize it. So you're saying you didn't shoot Kenny? Chalmers asked. I didn't shoot anybody. Are you saying Kenny was shot? Again, silence, and an exchange of looks. Pinheiro nodded to Chalmers. Kenny wasn't shot, Chalmers said. He was beaten to death. I don't think I could have hidden my surprise. Beaten? That took Indy out of the pool. Kenny was a big guy. It would take a big guy to put a beat down on him. Is that why you're looking at me? I jab him in the Adam's apple to stop a fight, and you think I iced him with my hands? Check him out. I lifted my hands as high as the cuffs in the ring allowed. See, no skin, knuckles, no cuts. You could have worn gloves, Pinheiro said. No defensive bruises on my arms, I said. No signs of fighting at all, except on the side of my head. I dropped my hands back to the tabletop. Oh, wait, that was you guys. We didn't say he was beaten with fists, Chalmers said. So now you think I snuck up behind a trained cop, the mayor's bodyguard no less, and beat him to hell with a brick or a baseball bat? I shook my head. Kenny was no fool, and he was probably armed. Whoever it was had to get behind him, and if he let that happen, he either trusted him or didn't consider him a threat, or her, because a weapon put Indy back in the suspect pool, at least as far as they were concerned. Or you tricked him, Pinheiro said. Hey, here's a thought. Why not look at the prick who clubbed me? Burko, right? He's got poor impulse control. Just then, the interrogation room door swung open, and Phoenix Trinidad, in a beige pantsuit, stepped inside. Okay, Raphael, playtime is over. Gideon, don't say another word. She looked at Pinheiro and shook her head. You arrested my client because of a text message on a prepaid cell phone? Pendejo? Vete al infierno. Fierno, Pinheiro said. The tower hit was near his place. I laughed. You thought I invited Kenny to the OK Corral with a burner? Now I am insulted. Gideon, be quiet, Phoenix said. We Mirandized him, Counselor, Pinheiro said, and he never asked for a lawyer. The way he leaned into her space as he held up his hands told me they knew each other well. Sure, and he was free to go at any time, she said, provided he could pull that table out of the floor and drag it out the door. You got no case and you know it. Uncuff him. Chalmers undid my cuffs and I stood up. I flinched when Phoenix came over and gingerly touched the side of my head to examine my gash. Kayla said they hit you. They wanted to stop me from resisting arrest with my hands up. You need stitches, she said, starting toward the door. I'll take you to an ER. As we moved into the squad room, Burko, minus his helmet, was still in his tactical uniform, rose from the edge of a desk on which he had been sitting and came near. He had bottle black hair and a thin salt and pepper mustache that curled with his smile. That's what lawyered up. Well, the CSU boys are good. It's only a matter of time before they find. He never got to finish the sentence because my uppercut caught him squarely below the chin and rattled his teeth so hard I felt the vibration in my elbow. One of the most satisfying punches I'd ever thrown. It sent him reeling into a padded metal frame chair, which tumbled to the floor with him. Hands shot out of nowhere, and I was thrown face down onto a desk. head pounding now and left cheek pressing down hard on a plexiglass paperweight, thankfully round. I heard Phoenix cry, "Gideon," as someone jerked my hands behind my back and somebody else said, "Now we got you for assaulting an officer." "That's the bastard who hit me with his rifle," I hissed. Phoenix took the cue and whirled on Pinheiro. "Raphael, you had no probable cause to break down Mr. Rimes's door, and even less to have one of your men hit him with a weapon." "Burko acted on his own," Chalmers said. "I was going to write him up." "Good for you," Phoenix said. "Now, Mr. Rimes is black, so there's a good chance of keloid scarring if that laceration isn't stitched up, perhaps even scalp disfigurement. I'd hate to stick the city with more than an ER bill. Forget the assault charge, and I'll advise my client not to sue for false arrest or jam up Burko with his own charges. Assault, harassment." For a moment, no one moved. Then hands fell away from my arms and back like skin off a shedding snake. Unsure who had given the signals to release me, I pushed myself up from the desktop and rubbed my left cheek. 7 or 8 detectives in uniforms, their faces flushed with anger, stepped back to give me room. Turning to Chalmers and Pinheiro, I spoke calmly. "If I wanted to meet Kenny to settle things as you say, it would have been just like that, face to face." Phoenix took hold of my arm as if certifying for those present that she understood I was crazy and would keep me from throwing another punch. "Let's get you to the hospital." She pulled me away from the growing circle of cops. "Got to get my gun back first," I whispered. "It's got nothing to do with the murder." "Gideon, I'll need it," I said, still close to her ear, "if I'm going to find Kenny's killer." Okay. Thank you for listening to that. I clicked off that so I can now go to full screen.
Okay.
The hero, and in literature, popular literature, classical literature, comic books, pulp stories, the hero is always that person who is a little bit outside of everybody else. He's a little bit away. He's a little bit isolated. He's the one that people might not trust, but they'll trust him to do what's right. He's a person who kind of works to an internal code, to do what must be done, which if you follow the Rimes stories, that is kind of his personal motto, but it's also the motto of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Army. Do what must be done. And he does. So I thought it's time there was a black character who was in that position. And I don't mean there are no black detectives running around. There are. Alex Cross, created by James Patterson, a white man. Virgil Tibbs, created by John Ball, a white man, back in the 60s for a successful series of novels. Walter Mosley has created several compelling characters, Easy Rollins, Fearless Jones, Leonard McGill, for mystery series that he has written. But we have so many characters who are, they follow that magical Negro trope that's part of literary and cultural history, where they're perfect people. And I remember I loved I Spy when I was a kid, but I remember that Kelly Robinson and Alexander Scott, Robert Culp and Bill Cosby, could go into a bar somewhere and, you know, Culp would order the vodka martini, and Scott, Cosby's character, would order milk or orange juice. Those aren't flesh and blood people. They're not people who have real issues and real moral conundrums. And I wanted to deal with those things from the point of view of a hero who is a reluctant hero, who doesn't necessarily like publicity, but he tries to do the right thing, not because it satisfies him, but because it is the right thing. And he is as flawed as the next person. So that's where I was going with all that when I started. So I suspect I'd like this to be kind of a discussion where the people involved will talk about their perceptions of heroism. And you'll notice I did not opt to do a police procedural. One of the complaints that got a lot of attention last year in the summer after the response to the George Floyd killing was that cops on television are presented as flawless heroes. And people complained about that it sets up a cultural vision of the police as being always right. And I didn't want to get into anything like that, even though at the time I wrote the first couple novels, my son was a police officer. He's now a corporate security specialist, but he was a police officer. And then I have friends who were in the police, and I knew everything I needed to know about police procedurals. I'd done ride-alongs and other things, but I wasn't writing a cop story. I'm writing something different, somebody who's not a cop and not constrained by the limits that are on a cop, but somebody who has to face choices. So any questions or responses or ideas about any of this stuff?
So I have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
My first one, I'll start off with Buffalo, since I'm a native Buffalonian. I do see that Buffalo plays a prominent role in your works. What is it about Buffalo that makes it attractive for you as far as putting it into your novels?
Well, there's a piece of old advice for writers, and it is write what you know. And I know Buffalo, so I set my stories here, and I'll tell you the main reason that I do that. I think Buffalo is a wonderful city. It's got its problems, obviously, but it has a lot going for it, and it needs a different kind of exposure. But the actual story of why I decided to double down on Buffalo was from my earlier novel, Blackbird Rising. I'll try to position that. If you can see it, maybe over here, out of the light, you can see that's the tower at the Pan American Exposition. Blackbird Rising, a novel of the American spirit. It takes place in Buffalo in 1901. You'll notice a black man in the background there, the Pan American Exposition. And what do you see on the side above my name?
Is that an airplane?
It's an aeroplane, a biplane, an early biplane. And that was 2 years before the Wright brothers was successful. That novel, which actually takes place in part of the corridor. The inventor of the airplane has a grandfather who has a blacksmith shop on Broadway near Michigan. When I wrote that novel, I was marketing it at the same time that the other novel about the Pan American, and I'm drawing a blank on it now. She was from Buffalo as well, City of Light. And that was just being published as I was marketing my book, and I had no idea that that was the case. And so the chances of a second public Pan American novel making it to a major publisher were small. One of the people who reviewed the book told my agent, "This seems like a book that would appeal only to people in Buffalo." And I thought, what the hell with you, pal? I'm going to double down on Buffalo. Buffalo has a lot of appealing things and a lot of appealing people. So when I started doing other things, most of my stories take place in Buffalo, but there's a universality to them. My play Matter of Intent takes place in Buffalo. And that is, it's a courtroom drama set in 1960. Where a black maid or day work girl is accused of murdering her white employer. And that play has literally gone around the world. Again, it was performed in London, and it was turned into a film in India. Now, it was a film, a story about murder across racial lines. In India, they made it murder across caste lines and told the same story. So there's a universality to what happens to people everywhere. And I think Buffalo ought to be on the map. Plus, every great detective series uses its city, its town, its area as another character. The most successful of that, I think, is Robert B. Parker's Spencer novels. They're set in Boston, and they had so many books, so Spencer's Boston. You know, my better half and I were walking along Boylston in Boston a number of years ago. And I said, Spencer's office is right up there because the city becomes a character, and a good writer will make the city live. And you pick your spot. San Francisco for the Maltese Falcon, Chicago for Sarah Paretsky's V.R. Wachowski novels, Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer in New York, Leonid McGill in New York, Easy Rollins in L.A. Where something takes place is as important as what takes place. In Buffalo, at the time, Buffalo didn't have a series, and now there are a few series set in Buffalo, and I'm happy to be one of them.
So one more question. In thinking about your, thinking about what you just mentioned a few moments ago about the idea of the hero, and you mentioned the murder of George Floyd. Actually, that's something every semester I tell my students that both fortunately and unfortunately, things that happen in the news, actually, we bring in news-related events like to class. The classes that have had the most influence on me as an undergraduate and a graduate student were those that tied in what we were learning to what was going on in the world. So even just thinking about what you said and about how, even in the case of Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, George Floyd, we know the pattern. We know that there's information that's going to be released about the individual first, that tries to make the person look terrible. And then meanwhile, like you said, painting the picture of the police officer as a hero. I also have an aunt who for over 20 years works as a detective in Indiana. But my question was, do you think that we need we need a hero during these times? You know what I mean? We need certain characters. Like there's a need to have a certain character to look at, to kind of take our mind off of things. But yeah, I was just thinking about that.
I think that's true, but I think it's also important if you have characters that have they can reflect what's actually going on in a different way. For example, in my plays, I've dealt with some pretty broad themes that have to do with race. For example, I was chuckling earlier because you said the news always comes out about the person who was shot. The news comes out about his criminal past, or even if he was a jaywalker. And that's done as a subtle way to say he had it coming. One of my plays was The Trial of Trayvon Martin, in which I flipped the script and had George Zimmerman die. And I was interviewed by someone who said, but it's no surprise, and you have surprises in all your stories, it's no surprise that the criminal justice system would treat him differently and he would be convicted when George Zimmerman wasn't. And I said, this wasn't supposed to be a surprise. It was supposed to be a revelation of reality. This is what happens under the circumstances. But I could deal with broad themes like that in a play, or in the play Mark of Cain, which is based on another true story about a black doctor in Detroit who bought a home in a white neighborhood in 1925, and the house was attacked the second night they were there, and someone in the house fired a gun in self-defense. Somebody outside in the mob of 700 died, and they all went on trial for murder with Clarence Darrow as their attorney. Those are broad themes. When I deal with something like the Nickel City series with Gideon Rimes, he gets to look at microaggressions. For example, at one point in Nickel City Blues, one of the cops refers to him as Shaft, and he stops and thinks, really? That's where you're going with this? That's a microaggression. And there are plenty of those that I think our experiences are full of those little microaggressions that can drive you crazy. And so I have a chance to explore those. And if this happens to somebody else, as it has happened to you, you know you're not crazy. And I think that's also a part of it, because you know you're not, because what is that line? Makes you want to holler. Sometimes it's overwhelming. So
So we have two questions. We have two questions from the audience.
okay.
One person, Sharon Holly, she
Yes.
asked, when you are writing a mystery, do you know when you begin how things are going to be solved?
Vaguely, but the details have to refine themselves as I go, because stories, good stories, are always about characters. So I have a vague idea. For example, the fourth Gideon Rimes novel is called Nickel City Naked Lady. Okay, go ahead, laugh, get it out. This novel deals with revenge porn, oh, naked lady, and a con saxophone, which I'm setting up to be stolen, but maybe it'll go someplace else. And now the con saxophone with a carving of a nude in the bell is called The Naked Lady. And there is also a poisonous plant that is called The Naked Lady. All three play a part in this story. Now, how they will all work together, I've slowly been building it in my head, and I've had to go back and say, no, I think I'll do it this way. But I have a rough idea when I start. It doesn't refine itself until I've put down on paper maybe 100 pages of the characters and their interactions, and then I know where things are going.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Jim Halston.
Mm-hmm.
Gary, I like the reference to the steady stream of mysterious hangings in the Erie County Holding Center.
Yeah.
Do you think you could write a true crime fiction novel featuring Erie County Sheriff Tim Howard? Who would investigate him and who would play him in the movie?
Oh my God. You know who I would have play him in the movie? And I know Jim. I don't know how big a film fan Jim is, but there was a character actor back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s named Dabbs Greer, who had a forlorn look about him. And if you want to look up Dabbs Greer, I would have Dabbs Greer play Tim Howard. Greer was sometimes a villain on a Perry Mason thing, or he might be a farmer somewhere. He had this perpetual look of confusion on his face. So Dabbs Greer would play him. But I resist the idea of doing true crime because I write fiction and I teach people how to write fiction, and I push people to abandon real life when they're doing something. Lots of people think, oh, I've got my life will make a good book. And most of the time your life won't. Your life is a standard life like most of ours. But if you've had a significant thing happen to you, you can use it as a springboard to do something else. Because if you're writing a true story, and it has to be really extraordinary to work as a true story. If you're writing a true story, that very seldom follows story structure, which is to say rising action as the conflict intensifies all the way up and you hit the climax, and then you have the denouement as you go down. You should go down the end of that after the climax, and you're sliding downhill. That is a hard thing to do with an actual life story and make it work the same way a book would work now, or the same way a novel would work. So I don't have the inclination to do that. I will take from true crimes, for example, the Trial of Trayvon Martin, or the Mark of Cain, wherein I take Dr. Ossian Sweet from the Chicago, or the Detroit rather, setting, and put him in a place that could be Buffalo, and I change his name to Ossian Cain, so he can begin by talking about, my name is Ossian Cain, and ministers are calling me, saying that I have the Mark of Cain, the first murderer. I mean, yeah, that gives me something to play with. I don't necessarily want to tell the true story. I want to make points. I want to score other points, and the true story gives me a venue to do that.
Thank you. Another, let's see, Francine Witt asks, since
Hi,
you
Fran.
are so close, would you use Niagara Falls as a character?
I would. A friend of mine, Susan Solomon, a retired lawyer who lives in Niagara Falls, has a mystery series set there. And I would use Niagara Falls. And at some point, I may push out the idea that other friends of mine who are mystery writers around here, that their cops might interact a little bit. If you've ever read Stephen King's novel, Under the Dome, you'll know at one scene, the Lee Child's character, Jack Reacher, shows up at the dome trying to figure out what's going on. And that was kind of cool to have one writer's character do a cameo. And I thought, we have, I'm on the board now of the New York chapter of Mystery Writers of America, and we have enough mystery writers in Buffalo that we've had a couple events here, and we're interacting with downstate because I think that's a nice way to put Buffalo on the map. So I might be able to use somebody else's character if I get permission and have him do a walkthrough. That would be fun.
Okay. So someone asks, could you speak more to the idea of the detective being an outsider in your novels and how that relates to the experiences of African Americans?
Well, let's start first with African Americans as outsiders. Ask anybody who has been the first Black in blank, the first Black to do blank, the first Black in this particular place, how he or she felt with everybody else around. What you find is that the Black person then is looked at because he's visibly different. And by being visibly different, he becomes the ambassador. Sinbad had a joke years ago on one of his albums where a crazy man got onto a bus, a crazy Black man got onto a bus and was doing weird things. And all the white people on the bus looked at Sinbad saying, as if to say, can't you do something to stop him? Suddenly he's the ambassador. And if you're Black, you know this sentiment. You hear about something horrible that's happened on the news and you think, oh my God, don't let him be Black. And when he's not, oh wow, you feel a sense of relief. We are outsiders, constantly having to watch our steps, constantly having to be aware of our surroundings and how we are perceived. It's the talk. We all had the talk from our parents at some point. You go into a store, keep your hands where people can see them. I do that to this day. I mean, I'm almost 70 years old and I'm not afraid of anything really, but I do that to this day. I go someplace and I keep my hands visible because I'm not going to give somebody the excuse to pop me in the chest because he's scared about something. That's being an outsider. That's having to walk on your tiptoes metaphorically all the time. And that happens not just to Blacks, but to other minorities as well. They know when they walk into a situation that they're being assessed, judged, depicted, evaluated based on everything they're doing. And my God, that makes it so hard to relax. So yes, so the detective in any circumstance is an outsider. If the private detective, you look at the classical private detectives, the Philip Marlowes and the Sam Spades, the Mike Hammers, and then you move past them to more modern iterations, and you find that the detective is a reflective interior. There are a lot of interior monologues where the person is looking at the things that are around him and trying to make sense of them and trying to perhaps bring balance to them. That becomes an overwhelming task to do that, to be the person to bring balance. And if you're a person who is in charge of things, say for your family, you're the one that your family depends on, you're the one who figures out problems, who solves things, you realize that becomes quite a burden. And if that's your life, okay? Now, detectives there's such a range of detectives. And I love mystery fiction and I've read it since I was knee-high to a duck, as my grandmother would say. And I've seen, well, let me take a look at Agatha Christie's Poirot as an example. Now, Poirot, if you know the character, is an outsider, a dramatic outsider. He's Belgian, speaks with a French accent, and works in England, and everybody wants to make fun of him. Agatha Christie knew that perfectly well. Sherlock Holmes, the consulting detective, again, an outsider. You can look and you see that Sherlock Holmes doesn't fit in with other people. Mike Hammer doesn't fit in with other people. Spencer doesn't fit in with other people. You're a tough guy and you're a gourmet cook and you read poetry. What's wrong with you? And that's something that I think heroes are like that. They're different because they're special. And the specialness is what makes them stand out. The specialness is what makes them make choices. Because sometimes you can choose to do something. And my editor said, what I like about this character is that when necessary, he will do something illegal, because it's not that the end justifies the means, but there is a purpose or a cause that is greater. And he will do a lesser evil to prevent a greater evil. Okay? And sometimes that may even come back to haunt him. In Nickel City Store Morning, there is a bit of that where he's accosted on the street by three men. He's not armed at that point because, and just so you know, he and the lawyer Phoenix Trinidad eventually hook up and they become partners. And she's in the book, in all the books as well. My friend Drake Colley, who grew up with me here in Buffalo, and he's a retired lawyer who now works, or who lives in Brooklyn. While I went into writing full time for my retirement, he's become a jazz musician, and he loves the Nickel City's books. And he composed a piece called Phoenix and Gideon about the two of them. And I really like that. And I'm thinking about, gee, if somebody will ever buy one of these for the movies, I'm going to pitch his music for it. But we have outsiders, and the outsiders make a difference because they're not like everybody else. Sometimes they're not afraid. Sometimes they see things differently. Sometimes they feel things differently. And that makes for a compelling person, somebody who will do things that you wouldn't necessarily do.
Thank you for that. So I have a question for you.
Yes.
What writers influence you, and what was it about their works that you found most appealing?
How much time have you got?
Only about 5 minutes.
I say that seriously because I calculated recently, at the rate that I've read, I probably have put away like 5,000 books. And and in terms of writers who influence me, I'll just start writing down some names. There'll be white writers, black writers, Asian writers. Okay. John A. Williams, James Baldwin, Richard Wright, if I want to go to black writers. Carleen Hatcher Polite, who was not only a great novelist, but a professor of mine at UB many years ago. Ray Bradbury, the first book I got out of a public library was Ray Bradbury's Hours for Rocket. Walter Mosley is an influence in the sense that he's a year younger than I am, but he scored with his novels before I published a novel. And we met when he came to UB, and I thought I won the Edgar Award, and he wrote this wonderful novel, The Man in My Basement. And I thought it would make a wonderful play. And I said, I got an Edgar Award for writing a play, and I want to pitch this idea to you. And he said, well, I don't sell my stuff for plays anymore. I thought, oh no. But Mosley's there. Also Buffalo-based Joyce Carol Oates. I've read Joyce Carol Oates since I was in college, and I love her work. Yukio Mishima. I've read a fair amount of Mishima. Let's see. There are a number of African writers that I've liked over the years. including Chinua Achebe. And I'm drawing a blank, and I think it's one of those age things. Won the Nobel Prize. Congi's Harvest was his. I'm drawing a blank, but it'll come back to me at some point. I've studied Latino writers, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Borges. I've read a little bit of everybody, a little bit of everything, a little bit from all around the world, just because I like to read, and B, it's a big world with a lot to be experienced.
Jim Holston said, was it Wole Soyinka?
Wole Soyinka. Thank you, Jim. I was drawing a blank, and I just that's terrifying. My dad died of Alzheimer's, so every time I can't remember something, there is a little fear firecracker going off in the back of my brain, probably destroying more brain cells. So yes, I read a lot of people. I have a lot of writers who are friends, and I read a lot of my friends because a lot of my friends read me, and it's just one of those things. We can't read everything or everybody. Just fun fact, we publish about 330,000 books a year in this country. An average of 219 make it to the New York Times bestseller list, and the average book sells 500 copies or less. So I read a lot of books that don't make it to the bestseller list because somebody should.
Gotcha. Thank you. So this is going to be the last question.
Okay.
This is from an anonymous attendee again. Considering the inherent flaws in characters, would you say Gideon Rimes ever deals with quote unquote imposter syndrome, where he suffers from self-doubt and insecurity? Is this specific to African-American characters in your novels?
I think that's such a human thing to feel. I don't think that's limited to African Americans, and it's not so much there that that he feels that. I think what he feels is an agnosticism, that he's wrestling with the idea of a higher power. One of his best friends jokes with him about his being an agnostic who quotes the Bible. But in the book Nickel City Naked Lady, which takes place post-pandemic, he's lost a good friend to the pandemic. And that was the friend who joked with him about that. And he looks at it and thinks that he's trying to put the rage he feels toward a God he may or may not believe in the pocket of his brain that is reserved for such things. And he thinks, why him, not me? And he thinks he's living on borrowed time, which is more the theme for him than imposter syndrome, that he feels that he's kind of on the edge. And he survives things that maybe he shouldn't, and he feels that a bill is piling up, that eventually the bill will come due. And when the bill is due, maybe he will get an explanation, or at least an apology. So that's kind of where he is with that kind of thinking. He doesn't think he's good or bad. He thinks he is. He doesn't think he's the best at anything. He feels that some people are there to do what must be done. Nickel City Storm Warning, which is coming out in May, deals with an attempt to of a white supremacist group to attack a diversity conference in Buffalo. And his godfather, Bobby, is beaten up by some of these people beforehand. And he says in this book that's coming out, how many times have I been to a church service where the priest introduces a rabbi, who introduces the imam, who introduces somebody else, and they all talk about how these people who are attacking religious institutions and doing mass shootings represent some evil that is not the plan of God, or not what we want to do. He said, how often have I been to those things and seen people like you, Gideon, standing there armed because somebody has to protect those people in that circumstance. And he's one of those people. He's a protector. It's not that he wants to be, but he kind of feels that that's why he was placed on earth, I think.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So before I go, I want to make sure to thank the following: Dave Jordan of UV's Center for the Arts for technical support, and also
Thank you.
Audrey Clark for her work as far as the publicity. Thank you for the panelists today. And thank you, Mr. Ross. What you've done, fortunately or unfortunately, is you can't see all the books behind me that are on the floor and on my 3 other books. You've given me a long list that I do not have time to read, but I will find a way to get, and I will be looking forward to the ones that you have coming out again. Can you just mention again the ones that are coming out on March 1st, April 1st, and May 1st for those who came on later?
Okay, Nickel City Blues will be republished. It's edited, slightly changed, but it's still the same book, but it's being republished by a new publisher on March 1st. Nickel City Crossfire, which has some significant changes because the previous publisher published not the final edits file, but the penultimate edits file, which had a lot of mistakes in it. And then the new book, Nickel City Storm Warning. And I'm working on Nickel City Naked Lady. So, and I'm not sure where I'm going from that, but I do have a couple short stories, Gideon Rimes short stories that have been published. And eventually I want to do Nickel City Baker's Dozen, where I have 13 short stories, but I have a list of titles and I just need to decide which one I'm going to pick next and what I can do with it.
Thank you very much. And also from our audience, everyone thanks you for this event today.
Thank you for your attention and your time, for giving me your time. And get down to the corridor. There's good stuff to see there. And I loved going through the Nash house. My dad grew up with Jesse Nash Jr., who passed away recently. And we've been family friends for a long time. So definitely get to the Nash house.
Thank you. And I think I'm turning it over to Dr. Williams now.
Okay.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I also would like to remind the audience that we will be meeting again next Wednesday, and the speaker will be Dr. Barbara Seals Nevergold, who will be giving a lecture on a pioneering African-American teacher in Buffalo, and that session will be moderated by Dr. Morrell, Fatima Morrell, who is an associate superintendent of the Buffalo Public School System. So thank you for your attendance. We look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great night.